get smoother with that, and it's just really, I mean, you know, we've all been doing this COVID thing for a while. So how do we create this hybrid sangha? But we're doing it, and Buddha Eye has been doing an amazing job. So many places have just been entirely closed. Anyway, okay. So let me pass around now. The Zoom folks, you guys make this, so this is also the awkward thing. So moving forward, you may have gotten an email from me, and it may be in your inbox, if I can actually stand up. So if you can pass that back. So I just want to take a look at the syllabus together, and what will happen, and I'm going to try to be super organized about this. There's a Dropbox link that's in the syllabus. I will follow up with another email where I tell you about the Dropbox link, and I probably say some words about tonight. So this means you guys can get access to the readings. If you don't have a printer or an easy way to print stuff out, just let me know. Okay, you can let me know after class, you can email me, and we'll make copies for you. But the idea here is that folks, just so we don't waste paper, and that it's easy, and for folks in Zoom land, you can have access to the readings too. It'll just be online. And then every week, it says what our readings are. So for the Zoom folks, or if you're not going to be here 1 week, you're going to be online, you're not here, or you're just not going to be able to make it, whatever, you can get access to the readings yourself. Does this make sense? Mm-hmm. So hopefully, again, you know, we're improvising, we're figuring it out. Hopefully this is will reasonably work for all of us. So also a thing to say about the readings is I love there to be a lot of material. Material makes me happy. But, you know, we're not grading each other for this time in the Zendo. So read when it enlivens you. You know, maybe it won't enliven you at all, but then I'll inspire you so much in class that you go back and you're like, oh, I have to read that thing that I totally didn't read. I am also a big person for handouts, which is another reason why stuff is online if you're in Zoom land, so that you don't have to feel like you're completely clueless about what we're looking at together in the handouts. So I will tend to excerpt stuff or just verbally excerpt it. So all this to say, total encouragement to read everything, but total permission to read nothing. Let's see, now did I leave myself a syllabus here? Yes, I did. Okay, what else do I want to say about the syllabus? We do have 2 backbone texts, so if there's anything that you read, one thing that I'll want you to read is the very brief, I mean it's like 3 pages, if that, very brief essay by Uchiyama Roshi called Vow and Repentance. And in the Dropbox there are 2 essays by Uchiyama Roshi. They're from the same book. They're both really brief. They're called, one is Vow and Repentance, and the other is called Living by Vow. Vow and Repentance, I will, that's
2 different ones?
Oh, are there?
I know, I'm asking you because you have them separated.
They're the same, all the same.
Gotcha.
I'll be probably citing something from Vow and Repentance every week. We'll be talking specifically about it in our last time together. But that's really a backbone text, the one thing that, like, please do read that. And the other backbone text, which we'll be reciting in here, are the 16 Bodhisattva precepts. Plus, this includes Dogen, the ancestor of Soto Zen Buddhism in Japan, 13th century, 1200s, so like the same time as Dante. That's when, same time as Aquinas, right? I mean, this is like this weird time across Europe and Asia where there's huge synthesis of big religious ideas. Dogen, our ancestors, commentary on the 16 Bodhisattva precepts. And he's also writing his commentary. And when I say commentary, these are like a few lines in this text. He's responding to Bodhidharma's 5th century commentary on the precepts, but kind of a rewriting of the precepts from the standpoint of one mind. So on this text, which is maybe small print, but isn't it pretty? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's all on one page. In our Dropbox folder, there's, if it's not there, I'll make sure it's there. There's a sort of normal, kind of regular, several page version of the same text so that you can play with it more easily. But in this text, what you'll see is the Bodhidharma, 5th century stuff, these underlying things where it says, like if you look at the first of the 10 grave precepts, in the everlasting Dharma, that's underlined, and then under the second one, in the unattainable Dharma. So he restates everything in terms of the Dharma, this one mind vision of the precepts. So does that make sense? So this document contains the 16 Bodhisattva precepts plus Dogen's brief commentary plus Bodhidharmas. That's a backbone text and huge encouragement. This is like gorgeous poetry, these commentaries. Huge encouragement to recite this on a daily basis or just frequently, just to like get the language of the precepts in these commentaries a little bit into your bones. Okay. Yeah, James.
It's precept, then Dogen, and then Bodhidharma.
Yeah, so like if you look at, and Bodhidharma's 1 mind version of the precepts, his commentary is only on the 10 grave. So if you look here, taking refuge, that's refuge in Buddha, refuge in Dharma, refuge in Sangha. Then the 3 pure precepts, embracing codes and forms. This is the abode of the law of all Buddhas. This is the basis of the law of all Buddhas. That's Dogen's language. Okay. And then if you look at the first grave precept, not killing the Buddha seed grows and the Buddha's life of wisdom is reached. Do not kill life. That's Dogen's, and then it's followed by Bodhidharma's. Okay. For those of you who are taking Jukai, some of this language will end up feeling very familiar when you actually go through the Jukai ceremony, because Dogen's commentary is read by Ejo, the preceptor, during that ceremony, along with a longer commentary by Dogen, which we will look at in our last week it's part of the longer commentary called the Kojukaimon. So this is language that we're going to be talking about, which will, for those who are taking the precepts, be ritual language. And that's kind of an interesting thing, right? The relationship between language that's just ideas and discursive, and we can play with it and we can make sense of it, and then language that's ritual. What is that? What is that difference, and what is that circuit that language can take? How can a phrase like I will go to the grocery market and buy some beer, how can, breaking one of my precepts in the process, how can a phrase like that become hugely potent ritual language when it's used in a marriage ceremony or a precept ceremony where we say, I will. Will you maintain this precept from now until becoming a Buddha? I will. And then I'll go to the store and buy some. No. But how is that possible? That's part of, that question is part of what we'll be looking at together. The other thing, 2 more things I want to say about the syllabus. And James demonstrated a really good point, which is just jump in. I tend to get, put me in front of people, and this introverted person that I am becomes even if I haven't drunk coffee recently. So just interrupt me, and you folks in Zoom land, interrupt as well. Okay, you don't have to raise your hand, either virtually or for real, just shout out. But 2 more things I want to say about the syllabus, and then we'll get into the meat. So one thing is that there's also a suggestion of further reading. So there are some of you may be like, this isn't enough, I need more. And so I've recommended some books that are known to some of us, because I think some of us have probably read them before, and they're easily available at your favorite bookstore or online. Robert Aiken's The Mind of Clover is wonderful. It's a little dated, so when I was trying to find if there's going to be a textbook for this class, I was like, no, but it's wonderful, and it's brilliant, and it's beautifully written, and it has another translation in the back of, I think it's in the back, of Bodhidharma's 1 Mind Precepts. And we have a few copies in the library of this. Reb Anderson's Being Upright is also a wonderful book, and in this book is structured, he goes literally through chapter by chapter the structure of the Jukai ceremony. So he talks about the precepts and Buddhist ethics from the standpoint of that ritual structure. Great book. Available online, available at your local Zen-do library. There are a few other books that we have here. This is another book by Reb Anderson called Entering the Mind of Buddha. I haven't read it, but everything I've read of his is really wonderful. And Robert Aitken's book, The Practice of Perfection, which is on the paramitas, but is a related topic. Then Dido Laurie has a book called The Heart of Being, which I don't think we have a copy of in the library, but it's another really wonderful book on the precepts. So for those of you who just can't get enough, there's more. Okay, and the other thing I want to say about the syllabus is just to point out that, each week there will be some kind of topical theme. I've tried to figure out what I want to say, but hopefully this time together will be so enlivening that will shift a little bit. So, be advised. Actual mileage may vary. But the thing that will stay pretty constant is that we will be focusing on different precepts each week. So we'll be going through, and those precepts that we'll be focusing on are listed in the third column. And then the readings covered will hopefully stay relatively constant, but it may be like when we get to week 4, how can we have a class on ethics and not talk about the fact that the world is burning, right? So, in week 4, how am I going to want to talk with you guys about Ukraine? I don't know. Is something else horrible going to happen that we need to talk about before then? Oops, did we just lose everyone? Okay, all right. Zoomland disappeared from it. So that may change. Okay, any questions about all of that? Make sense? Okay, and hopefully it won't always feel like I'm just talking at you. One more handout. Why only have 2 when you can have 3? So I'm breaking a rule of good teaching, which is if you want folks to stay engaged, don't give them stuff they're going to look down at. So try not to look at the handout. Okay? Okay. Let me set the scene. And this will date myself, I think. It's 1994. The movie is Speed. Has anyone seen that movie?
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay, so even you younger folks, is this Keanu Reeves? Is he someone before John Wick? He was other things. Okay. So it's 1994. The film Speed's coming out. So, okay, Keanu Reeves is Jack Travern, I think is his name in the movie, and he's an LA police officer, and he's just been given a medal. This is right in the first 10 minutes of the film. He's just been given a medal for saving LA from a terrorist attack, not a terrorist attack, but I guess. So. And then he goes to get coffee and muffins, and a bus blows up right behind him. And he receives a phone call from the phone booth, because it's 1994, and it's, of course, the psychopath, of course, Dennis Hopper. And Dennis Hopper's character says, "Pop quiz, hotshot. There's a bomb on a bus. Once the bus goes 50 miles an hour, the bomb is armed. If it drops below 50, it blows up. What do you do? What do you do? What do you do? What do you do?" Now, just before this moment, as Keanu Reeves is celebrating having just been given a medal with his sidekick partner, played, of course, by Jeff Daniels. Jeff Daniels, who's a little bit drunk, they're both celebrating. He says, "Jack, you gotta start thinking. Okay, you can't just keep relying on your gut. Your luck is going to run out, and I won't always be there." So here's Keanu Reeves, action hero. This is a film about things blowing up and bad guys and good guys. So it's kind of a film about ethics, but it's also a film that is foregrounding this profound human question. What do you do? What do you do? Right? This idea that we're not just always reacting from our gut. Right? That we have to think through our actions. And in so many ways, this question of ethics is really this, not just the question of how shall I live? Not just the question of what do I do? But the question underneath that question, which is, do I have a choice? The question of freedom, okay? The question of freedom from our reactivity, freedom from our animal sort of kind of innate reflexes, freedom to act in a way that, freedom from pattern, freedom from habit, freedom from addiction, freedom. Do I have freedom to act as a choice? Right. Now, here's the thing about us humans, right? The thing about us humans is that we got big old brains. So we actually do have the capacity, right, to do something, suppress, hold, put on hold our reactivity. We have the possibility using our big old brains, and I'm pointing to this part of the brain because this is the part of the brain that does it, our prefrontal cortex, right? You guys probably heard, like, there's the lizard brain, the amygdala, it's fear-based, right? It's reactive. But then that's the oldest, and I'm trying to point inside, but I can't actually get there. That's the oldest, evolutionarily speaking, part of our brain. But the most human part of our brain, this prefrontal cortex, right? Executive function. When you think executive function, the executives are the ones who tell the rest of the folks what to do. The part of us that can choose, can decide, right? We have those brains to do that. So there's a kind of, for me, sometimes I find it useful to think about stuff through the lens of social psychology. And certainly when we're working with the land of ethics, we're in the realm of the social and how humans in the social go about their business. So there's this famous experiment in 1972. It's actually a series of experiments, but it was first done by this Stanford psychologist, Walter Mischel. And it became known as the marshmallow experiment. Have you guys heard about this experiment? Mm-hmm. And it was revised over, many, many iterations. And because one of the things the very first experiment set of experiments didn't really test for are things like social economic status and race and gender, and like all the ways in which we now think, oh, well, that might affect how it turned out for that test subject. But all of those refinements didn't change the fundamental bones of this experiment. So the fundamental bones of the experiment, you take kids and you say to the kids, okay, here's a marshmallow or pretzel stick, because our lizard brains aren't all, like, individual results may vary. So, what activates my, it might not be what activates James's. So I'm not a marshmallow person, I would be a pretzel person. So they had marshmallows and pretzels, little kids, and they said, look, you can have one, or if you wait 15 minutes, you'll have a second. So this was a test of self-regulation. Can our brainiac part of our brain, can it put this other stuff on hold in the name of a future reward? Like, can we think before we act, right? And it turned out that the little kids who could do that, who could wait for the second marshmallow or the second pretzel stick, that all the ways that you might measure, like, success in the world, flourishing, happiness, all of the ways you could come up with, whether you're talking about things like body mass index, so do these people tend toward, gaining more weight than is healthy for them or less weight, toward earning potential, toward educational achievement, toward, sort of longevity, all that stuff, all those measures were significantly higher for the kids who were able to wait. Self-regulation makes you live longer, right? So this is a kind of interesting discovery. And it's a discovery that lies at the heart of ethics in an important way, in a way that also has a shadow to it, but an important way. The word ethics for us in English is translating the Sanskrit term. It's spelled, depending on how you transliterate it, it's spelled S-I-L-A or S-H-I-L-A. So I will say Sheila because, yes, I speak Sanskrit. No, I don't speak Sanskrit, but that is, I think, the correct way to pronounce it. So Sheila, translated as ethics, in Sanskrit, that may also be well understood to mean something like character, like moral character, or conduct, or virtuous conduct, or ethical living, or, and this is often how the Tibetans translate it, discipline. Discipline. Because that's kind of what we're talking about, right? We're talking about that ability to to put lizard brain on hold. But it's a tricky thing. So second quote, or second set of quotes. But let me pause before I dive into the handout. Comments or questions, did that make sense so far? Are you with me so far? Today what I'm really wanting to talk about with you guys is this whole idea of ethics and choice, and what choice is. And suggesting, okay, there's this thing, discipline. Well, what do we even mean by that? And why is that tied to ethics? What we understand as ethics, like how do I be a good person? What do I do? How is discipline tied to that? So, second set of quotes. Have you guys heard of Viktor Frankl?
Mm-hmm.
My married name is Tishman. My maiden name, that's a horrible phrase, my maiden name, before my maidenhead was lost. My maiden name is Frankl, but spelled differently. But undoubtedly, because my parents were German Jewish refugees, that's an important thing about me, undoubtedly back in the back time, not that long ago, probably some relation somewhere. But Viktor Frankl, so born in, I think, 1909, died in 1997, I think. He grew up in Vienna, was part of that very fertile, exciting, kind of thoughty, adventurous world of Vienna at the turn of the century, first 2 decades of the century. He became a neurologist and psychiatrist. And, the Nazis took over, invaded Vienna. And he had the opportunity, because of his professional standing, he could leave, but he decided to stay even after Vienna was taken over by the Nazis, to be with his aging parents, which is lovely. He fell in love, got married after that time, so in Nazi-occupied Vienna. And ultimately, in, I think, 1942, his whole family, they went to Auschwitz. Now, he survived, because he ended up going to a labor camp. His wife, his whole family, they did not. They perished in Auschwitz. Even before the Nazis, even before Auschwitz, he was already working on his fundamental sense of what a human life was, what it meant to be human, and it was all about choice. Then in 1946, he published sort of wasn't the first thing he published by a long shot, but it was about his time in the war and about his philosophy. And it's a short book, a wonderful book called Man's Search for Meaning. So the first quote, everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. So, freedom, about choice. Now, I alluded to the shadowy side of this discipline of Shila, because here's one of the places that shadowy side can appear, where we think, you can choose your attitude. Like, just adopt an attitude of gratitude. Yeah, things are shit, but just, turn that frown upside down. That's not what he's talking about. It's not like just force something. But there is finding the movement, right? That's what it's all about. Like, how do we find that movement of choice in the middle of our karma, in the middle of world history? Where does the choice lie? It's not by just pushing down the fact that we're sad or traumatized or in pain or that there's suffering. It's not just like negation. So choosing one's attitude is not adopt an attitude of gratitude. It's not that. It's something else. And I like the second quote, which I think helps clarify things a little bit. He says, so live as if you were living already for the second time, and as if you had acted the first time as wrongly as you're about to act now. Okay, so let's just think about this quote for a second. So live as if you were living already for the second time, and as if you had acted the first time as wrongly as you were about to act now. What's that about? Like, how do you make sense of that? Yeah.
I experience this on kind of a daily basis where I'm in conflict with my partner, and I feel myself approaching this place where I'm like, my capacity is lost, and I can kind of like step out from my body and be like, oh man, here it comes, you're about to do this thing, and I recognize that as the place where, you know, it's not like I'd start out the whole conversation by being like, hey, we're just gonna be real nice right now, but it's like this point where, even though I'm not making that decision on a regular basis, I recognize that as like the crux point where I could make the decision to, I don't know, use forbearance and kind of persevere through the moment, you know, like what they say, like, oh, just wait 30 seconds. If you're really angry, like, wait a minute and then like see what happens after that.
When you first mentioned discipline, before you mentioned Viktor Frankl, he was already in my head, and mostly because of that word choice, right? Like his famous quote about the stimulus and the response. And then
we're gonna get to that quote, and it's not him, but I love that you went there. Okay, we'll get there. But say what you're gonna say.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, for me, when I think of discipline, that's where my go-to is ability to create space.
Yeah, so ability to create space, and we'll come back. I love that you brought up that quote. Everyone says it's Viktor Frankl. It's Stephen Covey who falsely attributed it to Viktor Frankl, really made it up, but it's okay. And he says, he's like, I have this memory of finding this quote in a library by Viktor Frankl. Maybe it wasn't him, but if it wasn't, it should have been. That's what he says. Okay, Steve, thanks. Anyway, we'll come to that quote. But because well, we'll come there. It'll come there. But that idea of, and actually, you were, remind me your name. Robert was taking us there too, because that idea of, you know, wait 30 minutes, count to 10, all these ways that we might hit the pause button, right? Or if you're me, wait till tomorrow, because it's going to take that long to cool down. But here's the thing, right? Time here is the thing that's enabling, that idea of pausing, the thing that's actually enabling, articulating this very human ability to see our own pattern, right? Again, brainiac, we're super smart. We've got these, I mean, our heads are so big that we can't get out of our mom's bodies easily, right? You know, we've got these huge brains. So we're able to not only live our patterns, but to see our patterns. And I love this thing that Kyogen Carlson, he's the late co-abbot founder of Dharma Rain Zen Center, which our temple here has a kind of special relationship with. He's in some ways kind of a founder of Buddha Eye in certain ways. Kyogen Carlson said, he would say, once you notice a pattern, its days are numbered. And I love that quote, because a pattern only can remain tight upon us when we don't see it as separate from us. So the minute you notice a pattern, it doesn't have the same relationship to your body, heart, and mind as it did when you were just living the pattern, right? Now, its days being numbered, they may be kalpas, right? Numbered, I mean, you know? But something has shifted. Some space, some time, some gap, some buffer between you and this thing that was you, right? So live it for the second time. I love this Jane Hirschfield poem, and I think I've probably recited it in a Dharma talk before. I love it so much. Jane Hirschfield, she's a West Coast poet. She's also a Zen practitioner. I'm almost certain that this poem is written about time she spent at Tassajara Mountain Monastery. It's called A Cedary Fragrance. Even now, decades after, I wash my face with cold water, not for discipline, nor memory, nor the icy awakening slap, but to practice choosing to make the unwanted wanted. It's not to make the unwanted wanted, but to practice choosing. And maybe that's one way to think about where choice and freedom lie. Not so much in like, I've made this choice, but I practice choice. She brings into the picture here an important name for what the work of Sheila, the freedom that Sheila is about, whether we call it discipline or morality or virtue or ethics. She gives us a name for it. It's part of our practice. And she also points to the way in which this is about intention, intentionality, that willfulness of a phrase like, I will. Whether it's about going to the store to get some beer or about embracing the precepts. Intention is part of the picture now. What do you do? What do you do? What's your intention going to be? Not just what do you do from the gut, but now, what do you intend? For those, and there may just be a handful of us who've been looking at the koan that Edjo's been working with on Thursday nights, this intending is, and this is just sort of a side note, so if this makes no sense to you because you haven't been working on that koan, but that intention seems related to the work of figuring, what it means to figure to make a Buddha, what it is to imagine and to plan and to move toward. Okay? What do you do? What do you do? The Buddha's famous version of this question, what do you do? He's not Dennis Hopper when he when it comes up for him. He's not Keanu Reeves, but it's in the Diamond Sutra, and it's in chapter 2, so early on in the Diamond Sutra. And so I've got an excerpt from that here. Diamond Sutra, the oldest printed text in existence. So the printed text, the wood block print of it, 868 Common Era, 868 AD, probably written somewhere between like the 2nd and the 5th century AD CE, right? Really old, really old. One of the, not super, super old, there's older things like the Buddha, but one of the most important texts in our branch of Buddhism, in Mahayana Buddhism, a Prajnaparamita text, a text about the perfection of wisdom. Okay, so, does someone want to read this for us? So it's the quote here. Who feels like reading? And you maybe just read the first paragraph and someone read the second paragraph, so it's not just me yakety yakking. Okay, you're making eye contact. We'll cut.
Yeah. Pressing his palms together and bowing to the Buddha, Subhuti asked, if a noble son or daughter should set forth on the Bodhisattva path, how should they stand? How should they walk? And how should they control their lives? Let me continue?
Sure. And it's Subhuti is the way you say that.
Subhuti.
Funny looking word. Yes. That's it's the name of what there you go.
Yeah. The Buddha said to him, Subhuti, those who would now set forth on the Bodhisattva path should thus give birth to this thought. However many beings there are in whatever realms of being might exist, whether they are born from an egg or born from a womb, born from the water or born from the air, whether they have form or no form, whether they have perception or no perception, or neither perception nor no perception, in whatever conceivable realm of being one might conceive of beings. In the realm of complete nirvana, I shall liberate them all. And though I thus liberate countless beings, not a single being is liberated. And why not? Subhuti, a bodhisattva who creates the perception of a being cannot be called a bodhisattva. And why not? Subhuti, no one can be called a bodhisattva who creates the perception of a self, or who creates the perception of a being, a life, or a soul.
Okay. All right, so there's a lot going on in this passage. How many of you are familiar with the Diamond Sutra or with this passage? Okay, so a few. So the question, the version of the Dennis Hopper question, right? It's terrible to say. Subhuti, aka a psychopath in a 1994 thriller. No, but the version of that, what do you do? What do you do? Right? Or how shall I live? How do I live thoughtfully? How do I live from my brainiac brain? How do I live freely? Right? So his version of that question is, if a noble son, and we can think about noble in class terms, and that is accurate, but also thinking here about what it would mean to be someone who is seeking, who's a seeker, I think would be, if I wanted to translate when we see the word noble, or noble person in early Buddhist texts, I would say it's kind of like the way we use the word seeker, someone who is sort of on the path, right? And who has the freedom of their life circumstances, either by birth or by the way they've arranged things to be on the path. So if a noble son or daughter, and the gender equity is in the original, should set forth on the Bodhisattva path, how should they stand, how should they walk, and how should they control their lives? Okay? So how should I live? So the Buddha's answer is kind of weird, right? Those who would now set forth on the Bodhisattva path should thus give birth to this thought. So how should I live? The Buddha says, give rise to an intention, to a thought. The technical term for what he's talking about is what we call bodhicitta, the thought of awakening, the intention, not just the idea of awakening, but the intent. It's like, I want to wake up. I want to be free, right? So that's interesting that the answer to how shall I live, formulate an intention. That's where it starts. And then what is the intention? However many beings there are in whatever realms of being might exist. And as I was typing this out, I was like, should I ... and excerpt this long thing? No, it needs to be there, because look at how he goes through like almost every permutation you could come up with, right? However many beings there are in whatever realms of being might exist, whether they are born from an egg or born from a womb, whether they have perception or no perception or neither perception nor no perception. I'm not sure what that, like a rock maybe, right? In whatever conceivable realm of being one might conceive of beings, in the realm of complete, in the realm of complete nirvana, I shall liberate them all. And I've given you this long list so that you know when I say all, I mean all. And though I thus liberate countless beings, not a single being is liberated. What? And why not? Why not? Because a bodhisattva who creates a perception of a being cannot be called a bodhisattva. And why not? No one can be called a bodhisattva who creates the perception of a self or creates the perception of a being, a life, or a soul. What do you get from this passage? What are the pieces that make sense to you here? It's like very Buddhist-y sounding, yeah?
I don't know. I guess I could be totally on the wrong track here, but like perceiving of something as different from yourself isn't like the right way to look at it. It's like everything is the self. Yeah. And so, like, I don't know, that's what jumps out at me.
Yeah. Yes. So there's something about, okay, you need to give birth to the thought of awakening, right? But when you do that, it's got to be the thought of awakening everyone.
Not separate.
Right? And if it's everyone, it can't be, it's not like, those old McDonald's signs, 10 billion served. It's not like there's you and you and you and you and you, and I will know that I've saved you all because I can count you all, right? That's not all. So if you're giving rise to the intention to awaken all beings, to awaken, that's going to mean to awaken all beings. And it can't mean that you're giving rise to the perception of separate beings, of individual beings, of a separate self. Why? What's at the heart then of this intention? Does it make sense at all? And for folks who are like, I thought I was dealing with ethics, now you're giving me the Diamond Sutra and Prajnaparamita literature. Ask questions if this is just seeming opaque. Yeah.
How does choice come into this? If it's saying like everybody, everything, every little, all. Again.
Yeah.
Is there a choice there?
So freedom, liberation is what this is about. And the question is, right, the way that choice is coming into this is through the question of how should I live? I have a choice about how I live. Okay? You want to have a choice? Formulate an intention. And why do you want a choice? You want a choice because you want to be free. So how are you going to be free? How are you going to do that? So choice is emerging in this passage through the question of, like, How do I do this life? And that is being taken by the Buddha directly into what you want. What you want, my friend, is freedom. And if you want freedom, you don't just get to have freedom. Why not? Why can't I just have freedom the way I might have a sip of water? Well, actually, maybe it's exactly the way I have a sip of water, because I don't get to keep this water in my body forever, do I? Eventually I'm going to pee, right? Right? What goes in comes through me. So, am I going to have freedom? How can I have anything?
Unless you give it away.
How can I give it away? In fact, in the Diamond Sutra, the Buddha is going to go on to talk about generosity. That's going to be the key virtue that he talks about, is the perfection of generosity. And the question there is, if I give a gift, I can't have a perception of the gift as a separate thing, and I can't have a perception of giving it to a being, because then it's not a gift. It's like, here, let me remind me your name.
Brian.
Brian. Here, Brian, you can have this.
You gave it to me, but
Right.
there is no self. So.
There is no self, right? There is no self. So Subhuti asked a question about how should I do this? The Buddha is saying, you're asking about freedom. What is freedom? We're all in this together. So this is how the question of intentionality, choice, freedom, living a good life, becomes tied within Buddhism to what we call emptiness. The idea that everything is interconnected, that there's not going to be any separation permanently possible. Right? You want freedom? We're all in this together. Did I answer your question? Remind me your name.
Molly.
Molly, did I answer your question? I mean, I didn't answer it in a very satisfying way, I know.
It's all in there.
It's all in there, yeah. If we do enough hand gestures, we don't actually have to understand it. We can just... So, another way to understand this is that the Buddha's talking about the radical mutuality of all things, that we're radically interconnected. And that any freedom that arises in that, and the intention that arises in that, the technical name for that is bodhicitta. This is the thought of awakening, the thought of liberation, the intentionality to awaken.
Can I say something?
Yeah, Everly.
Yeah. So I've kind of very recently come up against this question, and in a very like embodied sense, kind of my own experience, and that interpenetration of my being and another being, and through anger, through the experience of anger, and I was really angry at somebody for a period of time because of the way that they were treating me and the way that it was affecting me. And I vented that anger to somebody else, to another friend. And once the person that made me angry, once we talked through and worked through everything, and the whole event played its course, and I mean, part of it playing its course was my venting to my friend, but also in venting to my friend, I took that seed of anger and made it flower in them, unfortunately. And now they are, in turn, for their own reasons, angry at the person that I was angry with initially. And there's the thought of, I can't take that back. Which feeds further into the idea of, when we think of this interpenetration and this emptiness, you need to, part of it, I think, is acknowledging that there's always a giving and receiving that is happening.
Yeah.
Every second, and to be mindful of how you are giving, and there's choice in that.
Right. Yeah, Everly, that's a beautiful example. And, there's a precept about anger, right? For a good reason. And precept about discussing faults. All these precepts that are about language and speech. And the question of right speech that's embedded in the 10 Graves precepts. So one way to come back to Molly's question, right? Where does choice fit in? So, okay, how do I'm in the clutch of my anger, my hot reactivity. What do I do with it? What do I do? So what we tend to do with our reactivity is throw that hot potato out, right? And then it's like, oh, I got rid of it.
Yeah.
But I didn't get rid of it. So that may have felt like that was a choice. But somehow the freedom that we think is going to be embedded in choice disappears in a choice like that, right? Because now we're not, the goo is just bigger, right? But then what do? You stuff it. You don't express your anger. You just be a nice, my mom, we always, maiden name Frankel, we always talk about the Frankel fine, because it's like, Mom, how are you? I'm fine. Mom, how are you? I'm fine. The lips get tighter and tighter, compressed, right? So what do you do? Choice, intentionality, emptiness, all together, right? And one of the things that Everly's example really demonstrated, what's so fascinating about ethics as fascinating, maddening, enlivening about ethics as a topic of inquiry, is that it's so situational. Like, this stuff can feel abstract, but we can't really make sense of it until we start to talk about how it plays out. And studying the precepts are great for that. That all this stuff is so, you were saying, Everly, in a very embodied way. All this stuff is embodied. And in fact, when we're talking about choice, ethics, intentionality, discipline, Shila, we're talking about that place where the Buddhist rubber meets the Buddhist road, where we're like, okay, here's this body, this life, here now, and all of its gush. But it also has a sense of the big shebang. I have an awareness of radical mutuality and emptiness. I have an awareness of awakening. I've given rise to the thought. Bodhicitta is alive in me, but I'm here in the muck. How do I navigate that? This is what Uchiyama Roshi's little essay is about. This idea of being a person. That being a person, I've been talking about living our human life, but he talks about being a person is about that place where the absolute meets the particular in freedom. How do we do that? So there is a lot of stuff in Western literature, Western philosophy, Western thought. I think I said thought twice there. It's a good word. Say it as many times as we can. About ethics. And one of the things that Western thinking about ethics helps clarify is kind of different aspects of whatever this choice is. And these distinctions, they're a little bit particular, but I think they're super, super helpful. So I want to talk about the three branches of ethics according to kind of a Western framework. And keeping in mind that these three branches are all trying to make sense of what it is to live a free life of choice in a world where we are like with others, in a world of mutuality. Okay? So the first branch is called deontology, which sounds long and absurd. Deontology. And if you know the word ontology, you might think this is like the anti-ontology. It's from the Greek word dion or something like that, because I speak Greek about as well as I speak Sanskrit, but the Greek word for duty. Deontology is the branch of ethics that says, how shall I live? I will live according to rules. Duty calls and I respond. Virtue is its own reward. The Jewish version of this is the reward for the mitzvah, for the commandment of God, is the mitzvah. So this is a stance that says, conform to a rule, hold fast to your principles. When duty calls, you respond. The Buddhist version of this is our relationship to forms. And actually, as we'll see in a minute, one flavor of this might be the first pure precept, embracing codes and forms. But also, the Zen teacher Norman Fisher, who will be reading an essay of his next week, Norman Fisher has a book called When You... what's the title of it? I always get it wrong. When You Greet Me, I Bow. Right? That thing, you know? Right? I do this, you guys do... I do this, you do that. Right? I mean, there's something about that way of expressing choice, where we're saying, okay, this is what a virtuous life looks like. These are the commandments. Honor your mother and your father. That one. Right? Following the rule. The second branch is called consequentialism. And that's the branch of ethics that says, how do I live? Well, an ethical life is a life that produces a good impact. So this often has a kind of negative cast to it, like the ends justify the means, or Stalin saying, you can't make an omelet without breaking some eggs, which is okay unless you're the egg that's broken, right, to make this omelet. So it can often feel kind of crude and negative. It's instrumentalist. But, on the other hand, if we didn't have some idea of outcome, how could our choice feel right? Like, even if I were totally deontological about this, and I was like, duty calls, if I'm just obeying a rule because it's a rule, then I'm just like living by algorithm, right? So that sense of what the end is playing into my choice seems super important, right? One of the things when we look at these different branches, sort of a way to help us think about ethical action, it starts to make us think, okay, everything is interconnected. Like how we find our freedom is always more complex. A Buddhist version of consequentialism we'll see very clearly when we get to the question of in our fourth class, when we look at Dogen, our 1200 ancestor, talking about kind speech. And he says, kind speech, it mollifies your enemies and it pleases your friends. It's like, dude, who knew that Dogen was into Dale Carnegie? Like, how to influence people. And, it's like, but Buddhism has its branch of a kind of ends justifying the means, too. There's something about the way that we sort through this question of what do you do, how do you live this life, that has kind of resonance across world traditions. The last of the three main branches of ethics is a virtue-based ethics. And so this is the one that says, okay, look, it's not about what you do, it's about who you are. Here's the focus on intention. It's the thought that counts, right? That sort of sense of things. So, in the West, people talk about virtues, the four cardinal virtues, justice, prudence, fortitude, and temperance, or the theological virtues. Or we just talk about, a good heart, what it means to act with a good heart. In Buddhism, we talk about the paramitas. So you were talking about forbearance, sort of these ideas, or generosity, like these ideas. These are ideals that we set forth. Right? All three of these positions, one that's like you just follow rules because you follow rules, you look for a good consequence to actions, or you act from your intention. All three of them are intertwined, and all three of them are going to be important in our explorations together. So I invite you to think about, like, what is being said here, and what difference does it make if we're saying this is coming from my good heart, or if we're saying this is coming because I think it's a good end? How is that helping me to kind of think through concrete choices? So like the example Everly was thinking about, like when I make this action, like what's going to be the outcome of telling my my friend about my anger at my other friend? Is that how I decide what to do? Or am I looking at my intention here? What is my intention? Do I follow that? And how do these ways of parceling out our being and our doing help us find the freedom that we seek? Okay. I think Buddhism, one of the things that it offers us and offers the West is a way of understanding why these three things are entangled, why a kind of duty-based following rules is related to a thinking about consequence, is related to a thinking about virtue. Because Buddhism, and I think this will be a theme that we'll unpack more and more in our time together, because Buddhism is focusing on this question of practice, it helps us see how these three interrelate. Okay, you guys are, I can tell, like, people are getting like, oh, she's been talking now. It's been like an hour, and now she's using words with ontology in them. Hopefully these distinctions will be of use, they will be good tools. Okay, one last topic, and then we're out of here. So flip over your sheet. And Meg, we have a quote for you to read.
I see it now.
Okay, can you read this quote?
Sure, of course. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space lies our freedom and power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our happiness. Stephen Covey.
Okay. All right. So here we have this idea. In mindfulness practice, we talk about the stop practice, that little image that I have on the right there. It's like, okay, you've been triggered. What do you do? What do you do? A psychopath tells you he's going to blow up a bus. What do you do? What do you do? Stop, Keanu, stop. Take a breath, observe, and then proceed, right? So this idea of finding that beat, stopping between a recognition of us being impinged upon by the world and us acting in the world. This stop, which is so helpful, right, is the little wedge that in practice we can push between being and doing. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. This is what the first pure precept is all about. Okay, so the first pure precept, embracing codes and forms. Let's just read this out loud together. We'll read through all three precepts. Embracing codes and forms. This is the abode of the law of all Buddhas. This is the basis of the law of all Buddhas. Embracing good dharmas. This is the dharma of unsurpassed, complete, perfect awakening, the path of practicing and being practiced. Embracing living beings. This is transcending ordinary and sacred, taking self and others across. Okay, Dogen's words, like... I just am curious, like this first pure precept. I remember when I was taking the precepts, I was fine with it because before I was interested in Zen, after I left Judaism behind, I wanted to be a Catholic. I wanted to be a nun. So the idea of embracing codes and forms, yeah, I wanted to enter a convent, for goodness sake. But there was someone in my cohort who's like, holy cow, is Buddhism all about like conforming to the man? Is that what this is? But this embracing codes and forms, I want to suggest to you guys, this idea, this deontological notion of ethics, like just follow the rule. This is a place of stop, right? It's like, just stop. Refrain from what you were gonna do. Why? Because I'm telling you to. Mm-hmm. The origin of the first, the pure precepts, the origin is older than the precepts, than the 16 Bodhisattva precepts. It goes back to words that are attributed to the historical Buddha and are in the Dhammapada. So this collection of sayings of the historical Buddha that was compiled around the 3rd century before the Common Era, BC. In the Dhammapada, we have what's often referred to as the teaching of all Buddhas, and it's on your sheet, but just listen to it. Listen to how similar it is. It gets translated into what becomes the 3 Bodhisattva precepts, pure precepts. To avoid all evil, to cultivate good, and to cleanse one's mind, This is the teaching of the Buddhas. To avoid all evil, or some translations are to refrain from evil. If you've ever been here for a formal meal, you may have heard the bowl raising verse that we recite, which is another version of this same teaching of all Buddhas. The first bite is to end all evil. The second is to cultivate all good. The third is to free all beings. May we all realize the Buddha way. The first bite, end all evil. Stop. Stop. Knock it off. Knock it off. So the story that always comes to mind, I put an excerpt here, but I won't read it, is the story, also another ancient story, goes back to the early Buddhist communities, the Angulimala Sutta. Angulimala, that literally, like if you think about a mala, like a bracelet, a necklace, Angula means fingers. So Angulimala was this murderer. Here's the story. This is like a great bedtime story, except that he wore a necklace of fingers of all of his victims. He was a horrible murderer, right? And he hears about the Buddha, and he's like, the Buddha! You know, he's like, this holy man, I'll get him. Like picture this in the Marvel verse, right? You know, like, I'll get him. He sees the Buddha through his, Buddha powers. No matter how fast Angulimala chases him, the Buddha, who seems to be walking normally, naturally, is just farther and farther ahead. And Angulimala, stop, stop, stop. The Buddha's still far away. Finally, the Buddha actually does stop and says, I stopped, Angulimala, now you stop. What? What do you mean? I long ago started to refrain from evil. Now you stop. Angulimala at that point becomes a follower of the Buddha and, becomes a great person. But the thing is, he stops. And the first thing that happens is the villagers complain to the Buddha and say, you have this guy, Angulimala, we want him because he's killed a bunch of us. Like, we stop. And all that dust that we've been kicking up, all that, it's like Pigpen in the old, Peanuts. Like, it's all there now, right? We stop. Oh, that's when the karma is here. And this is where the movement of repentance has to happen. Like, oh, all my past and harmful karma, right? I stop. Now I'm in the dust that I've kicked up all this time. So this is the first pure precept. This is about stopping. And this is kind of where I want to take us today, is to think that, when we talk about Shila, freedom, choice, as a movement of discipline, that brainiac part of our brain, hitting the pause button, creating some space between lizard brain and our full human potential, our bodhisattva selves, our bodhicitta. When we talk about that, I can't remember what I was going to say when I started this sentence. It was going to be profound. Oh, when we talk about that as a movement of discipline, when we talk about Shila as discipline, I want us to hear the ways in which discipline is about stopping. And this takes me to a quote that is near and dear to my heart that I've worked on in other classes. In the Bodhisattva practice group, was that last year or the year before? From Shantideva, a Indian sage, right, in the Tibetan tradition, quite revered. That quote next to the stop sign, he's talking about Shila, he's talking about discipline. He says, when the urge arises in your mind to feelings of desire or angry hate, do not act, be silent, do not speak, and like a log of wood, be sure to stay. Right? Stop. Shila is about stopping, being like a log. And incidentally, the word Shila with a short I in Sanskrit apparently means stone. So there's something about discipline, Shila as discipline and virtue, which is also like, be immovable. Because when you're immovable, finally, who you are catches up to you. Now you can be who you are. You can see who you are, although it may look like dust and mud to begin with. Does this make sense? Yeah, please.
I guess I'm still a little confused just about like the words, like embracing codes and forms. So like,
Yes.
I understand what you're saying about stopping, but
Yeah.
for the example of the murderer in the story, if he stops and he sort of becomes aware of what he's doing, there's still the implication, obviously of right and wrong, which I'm sure we're going to be talking more about. But the wording of codes and forms, I guess what comes to mind for me is like laws, which of course, I mean, I guess I feel a little bit like your classmate from before, like that following laws unquestioningly sometimes causes you to do worse than if you weren't following unquestioningly. So is it just like the idea that you need to question laws then? Because that seems like the opposite of embracing them.
Beautiful. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so, how many of you used to sit cross-legged on the floor before and sit still for 40 minutes before you started coming to a Zen center? Oh, okay, well, okay. There's always one. Right? So there's something about form which absolutely produces resistance. That's the interesting place for me. Where we're like, hold on a second here. What do you mean when duty calls you respond? Does that mean when they call you up to go, to Vietnam, you just go? Does that mean that, you get drafted, you go? Does that mean that, your employer tells you to do something that you think is wrong? You just do it? There's something about taking it on enough to feel the resistance that activates this movement that Uchiyama Roshi talks about in terms of being a person, this joining together of the particular and the absolute, where the Buddhist rubber meets the Buddhist road. This is also, and the reason I talked about sitting cross-legged, this is also the movement of Zazen. Like, stop, sit still. It's not fun. But something happens, right, when the dust gets kicked up. So I don't know that we're going to be talking about good and evil. I don't know. Yes, of course we are, but we're going to be talking about it as a continual path of question. Okay. All right, I think it's 8:30. Buddha.
This and all our teachings are offered free of charge. If you would like to make a donation, please visit our website at buddhaeye.org and click the donate button at the top of the page. Thanks.